morning, everybody, and welcome back to the California Small Farm Conference. My name is Evan Wigg. I'm with Community Alliance for Family Farmers, and we are here on the fourth day of virtual programming. Excited to have you here. We're going to be kicking off Jewish agricultural wisdom and ethics, and we are very excited about this one and excited to see so many people showing up for this because I'm sure there's a lot to learn here, and this is also going to be an interactive workshop. So I encourage you guys to use the chat, and you'll hear more about ways to interact. But otherwise, enjoy this workshop, and why don't you take it away, Shani?
All right. Hi, friends. I'm so excited to be here. I'm going to share my screen really quick. There we go. I'm a farmer and a Luddite, so let's, that's not what I wanted to do. Oh my God, sorry. All right, there we go. All right, so my name is Shani. I use she and her pronouns, and I am the co-founder and the executive director of the Jewish Farmer Network. I'm so excited to have you all with me today. The Jewish Farmer Network, if you are unfamiliar with us, we are a networking organization that works to connect Jewish farmers to each other and also to the agrarian wisdom contained within the Jewish tradition. So that's kind of what we're going to dig into a little bit today. Before we get started, I'd love for folks to just post in the chat kind of your name, where you're coming from, and why did you come to this session today? So I'm just going to take a couple seconds and let y'all share in the chat. And also, if anyone wants to come off mute and tell me why you came today, I'd love to hear it. It's nice to ground in purpose. And yeah, reason for why we're seeking the knowledge that we're seeking. Okay, Muriel in Sacramento doesn't speak Spanish. Great. Anyone else want to share where you're coming from today? Yes. Okay. Mary in Sonoma County comes from a secular background and is interested in how different faith/cultural traditions inform agricultural traditions. Awesome. Sherry tried to grow etrogs, has some Sephardic heritage. Very cool. Susan is not Jewish, but is interested in the knowledge that I'm going to share. Great. So happy to have you, Susan. Amazing. We've got some New York Jews whose great-grandparents were apple farmers in Ukraine. I love that. I love that. Knowledge sharing, love Jewish learning, came to learn. That's reason enough. Awesome. As you heard in the beginning, this session is going to be somewhat interactive, and the ways that it can be interactive and the way that you help me be interactive is to post questions in the chat. And also, I know this is unorthodox, but I want to just encourage you to interrupt me. One of my teachers, Naomi, when she teaches on Zoom, she says, just interrupt me, take yourself off Zoom, ask questions, because your questions will enrich the learning that we're doing here. And so I think I'm going to dive into it a little bit. And before we dive into actual wisdom, I want to ground a little bit in the why. So there are two whys for why I'm teaching this work today, and why actually sharing this work and creating the networks to ground into this learning is important. And there's this inward facing why, which is cultural healing. And then there's this outward facing why, which is agricultural healing, which is like for the food systems overall. So I'm going to start with the inward facing why, the cultural healing. So that's me, Farmer Shani. That's sometimes what the name that I use when I'm teaching kids. And I'm a first generation Jewish farmer. I started working on farms when I was about 18. And at that point in my life, I was looking for something, I was searching for something to connect to. So I was looking for ways to ground my feelings of affinity and connection to agriculture and farming in something. I was like looking for like spiritual, cultural, intellectual substantiation for this like feeling of rightness that I had about being connected with agriculture. And I was looking for that kind of like everywhere. And so I was studying environmental ethics and I was like reading a lot of that. And I was looking there. I was reading Native American legends and traditions. We know that those are not mine, right? But I was connecting to that and I was like, wow, they really get it. And then I spent a summer working on this farm. And what I heard from the rabbi there, his name is Pesach Stadlin, he said to me, he said, Judaism is one of the oldest earth-based agricultural traditions still being practiced today. And I had this insane revelatory moment where I realized that everything that I was looking for elsewhere was actually contained within my cultural heritage, my cultural tradition. And I actually had so much there that's ancestral that I can connect with. But the question then remains, why didn't I know about this? Why didn't I know about the agricultural traditions of the Jewish tradition? Like, why didn't I know that Judaism is an earth-based tradition? Why was that piece of it kind of cut off for me? Why was it surprising for me to hear that Judaism is the oldest earth-based tradition still being practiced today? It's unbelievable that I could grow up. I mean, I grew up in an Orthodox community and I just, this piece of it was like blinded from me. And this is something that my friend Heidi calls agricultural amnesia. And I think it's something that a lot of people from all sorts of cultures and traditions suffer from. We're missing, she called it cultural amnesia. I put the agra at the beginning. But a lot of us are kind of like lacking in touchness with our cultural heritage. And so that kind of put me on this journey of reintegration of learning. But here's another piece of why I didn't know this. So this is yes, Muriel in the chat. I think a lot of city people have that amnesia. That's true, for sure. So this quote is from a book called Our Jewish Farmers by Gabriel Davidson. And this book is a record of the work of the Jewish Agricultural Society, which was a society that was set up in the early 1900s to resettle Jewish refugees fleeing persecution in Eastern Europe onto farming communities in North America. I could teach a whole class about the history of the Jewish Agricultural Society. Basically, at one point, there were 500,000 Jewish farmers in the US. And it's a really rich and beautiful history that I encourage you to look into. But in this book by Gabriel Davidson, that was published in 1943, there's this like really long quote. But basically, he writes that it took 2,000 years of denial, persecution, legal restriction, and religious hostility to convert a people of farmers into a people of middlemen. Does someone know a little bit about this? I'm gonna like poll the room. Does anyone like, what is this bringing up for you? And I really want to encourage people to come off mute. It will help enrich all of our experience in learning here.
I was literally reading a book called Oceans of Grain last night, which is this amazing book about the history of wheat. And it just last night they were talking about in the Russian Empire how they enacted all these laws in the late 19th century, essentially barring Jewish people in the Russian Empire from owning from owning land, and even all these restrictions on who could trade wheat, and just so many rules and restrictions around what they could and couldn't do. Even though like the whole, empire was like falling apart and being crushed by American wheat, and just all these global forces that were so much stronger than them, and all of these responses, these sort of repressive responses that essentially led a couple of decades later to the entire fall of the Russian Empire and the Russian Revolution and all that kind of stuff. So it's just really fascinating to hear about that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Evan. Does
Let
someone
me just,
else?
let me
Oh,
just
yeah.
chime in. So I've studied economics, and it appears to me that the principles of economics as we have them now are really contradictory to the realities of, ecology and growing food. And I'm really curious to hear if you have any insights about the practice of Jubilee in the Bible. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
We're gonna get there. We're setting up the framing right now of the why don't we know this, and then we're gonna learn some of it. So I love that you're bringing up Jubilee now, and we're gonna definitely get into that towards the once we get into the actual text-based learning. Thank you. The Jewish people are a diasporized people. I don't say diasporic or diaspora, because saying diasporized implies that it was done, something that was done to us. We were not forced into we didn't go into diaspora by choice. And the Jewish people suffer from like layers and layers and layers of being diasporized, of being, like this quote says, persecuted. And like Evan mentioned, unable, like in some Jewish history, so I'm just going to name really quickly that I am an Ashkenazi Jew, which means that my family comes from Eastern Europe, and the history of my ancestors in Europe was one in which we were not allowed to own land. And also there was and is and the ever looming fear of being persecuted again. And so what that does to a people is, we're not allowed to own land. So it's like, oh, we're not really going to actually practically able to be farmers. But even if we did have access to land, there's also this other sense of like, oh, why would I invest in, in my soil, in this land, if I'm just going to be forced out again? And so this is kind of like a big piece of like why we, and I don't want to say everybody, but why most Jewish people and Jewish farmers, the Jewish farmers that I meet through my work, are out of touch with the Jewish agricultural wisdom that we're going to get into today. There any other thoughts on this before I move on? Anything anyone wants to share? Okay. And I want to just name, actually, before I move on, that the things when I'm prompting for participation, valid things you can share are questions, things that you're just like curiosities, things that you're noticing, and things that maybe this is like reminding you of, like what does this make you think of? It could be an association with something else. There are also other things you can share, but I just want to name that it doesn't have to be a question or like a grand statement. It can just be this reminds me of that other thing, or this makes me wonder. Awesome. Okay, so that was the inward facing, that was like personal cultural healing. And then there's this agricultural healing. So this is this outward facing why, which is that Jewish wisdom can and should be part of the larger conversation about how to rebuild a better food system. So Jewish agricultural wisdom presents a blueprint for an agrarian society that takes care of self, soil, and community. Before the 2,000 years of persecution and legal restriction, et cetera, the Jewish people were an intact, flourishing agricultural society that really, really took care of ourselves. We took care of our soil, and we took care of those in our community who were in need. And we're about to get into some of those principles. Great. And And before we get into those principles, I just want to add a little disclaimer about God language. So we are going to be learning from some wisdom from the Torah. I'm not using the word Bible because I am decolonizing my relationship with that text, and that is what my people call it. And there's a lot of language about God, and I know that that language can be off-putting to people. So my encouragement is to use your imagination. And if the God part heightens your connection with the text, awesome. If it makes you feel weird about the text, use your imagination to blur and bleep it out. That's that. Great. All right. Can I get someone to read this quote from the Torah?
Sure.
Yeah.
The Eternal One placed the human being in the Garden of Eden to till it and to tend it. Genesis 2:15.
Amazing. Vayikach yikuk Elohim et hadam v'nichihu began Eden le'avodah u'leshamra, to guard and to work it. Does anyone, what is this bringing up for y'all? This is right in the beginning of the Torah.
That we're meant to be stewards of the land.
Stewards of the land. Yes. Thank you so much. Mary, I saw you came up too.
Oh, I was going to say something very similar, like a sense of responsibility. Like it doesn't say, to feast on it or like to profit from it, but rather to till it and tend it.
Amazing. Yeah. So our original orientation put forth in this text is one of stewardship. I really like that word that was shared, is one of stewardship. I love Evan just posted in the chat. It also places humans in an active and not passive role with nature. So we are a necessary part of it. Okay, amazing. Anyone else before we move on? Okay, I'm just warming you up. Okay. So in Hebrew, the word for man, or like mankind, is Adam, and the word for earth is Adamah. So the word for human, Adam, is contained within the word for the land. So this is another just piece to like our orientation towards the earth, is that we are of it. Any reflections on this? Has anyone heard this before?
It's interesting to me that those first two words, Adam and Adamah, are led with Aleph, which is always the strong leader.
Oh, nice. Awesome. Yeah. So the first letter is the letter Aleph, which is at the beginning of the alphabet. It's this it's a strong leader in the letters. There's a lot of Kabbalistic thought around letters. So I appreciate you bringing that in. Yes. Thomas said, to whom much is given, much is expected. I love that. I think thinking about the prior verse talking about to till and to tend it. Amazing.
It kind of reminds me of this false dichotomy that I guess Western culture often sets up between human and nature, and this the myth of the uninhabited nature that has kind of underlined a lot of environmental conservation in the US, back when national parks were being formed. The idea that there was some kind of perfect land without humans, this kind of undermines that idea.
Absolutely. I love that.
To me, from just from a different perspective, from a Catholic perspective, growing up, when I read Genesis, and we humans, I hear of humans are a reflection of God, and I love seeing that Adam here is mankind, and the earth, I've always felt is a reflection of God, and that we're all tied in together. So I think that's really beautiful to see. that this is the original version, right, of what I grew up with as the Bible, but I know that this is the Torah is what it, I mean, it's directly what it is. And so that's really beautiful to see in its original meaning there. I don't know, that's maybe what I get of it, and maybe I'm stretching it. But just from my perspective, I think that's really beautiful, because I think that humans are a reflection of a higher being, and so is the earth, and I think that we're all tied in together. So just thought that was neat.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Okay, we'll move on. Okay, so my friend Nati used to run an organization called the Jewish Farm School based out of Philadelphia. And he distilled down these 7 core Jewish agricultural values. And these are some of the values that we're going to dig into. And they are as follows. Or actually, could I get someone to read these out instead of me? Another voice? Maybe we haven't heard yet.
I'll read them if you like.
Amazing. Thank you.
All of them?
Yeah, let's do
Okay.
that.
1, centers the needs of the most vulnerable. 2, encourages gratitude and generosity. 3, values physical labor, treats workers and animals fairly, and integrates cycles of sacred rest for all. 4, facilitates emotional and spiritual connection to food, plants, nature, and wilderness. 5, celebrates through feasting and fasting. 6, redistributes land and wealth. 7, puts limits on power.
Awesome. Thank you so much for reading that out. What's coming up for people before we even get into the actual text? What's coming up from this list? What do we think?
I just think it's really interesting. I'm involved in the farmers market world, and the beginning of organic agriculture in California and CSAs and farm stands and all that. And I'm 70 years old, and my parents were very Jewish, and my daughter is now really, really Jewish. And I call myself a culinary Jew. That's about as good as it gets. But it's just so interesting to me, having been around the world of agriculture for nearly almost 50 years. I've been doing this job, that I never, you hear about Asian farmers and all the immigrant farmers that are now coming to California to farm, and what amazing farmers they are. But I just never, ever, ever heard the connection, even until I was 65 years old, that my great-great-grandparents were apple farmers in the Ukraine. I'm Ashkenazi also. So this is really comforting, and I'm feeling like I could never figure out why I loved agriculture, but here we go.
In your blood. That's that agricultural amnesia that a lot of people suffer from. And there's a lot that went into that happening. And so I'm glad you're here and that we get to get into this together. Anyone else? Any reflections? It sounds like a pretty cool food system, right? This one?
Yeah.
Like centering the needs of the most vulnerable, limits on power. It's pretty nice. Yes, Mary, thank you for sharing the emotional and spiritual connection to food, plants, nature, and wilderness. Mary said that this feels very meaningful, as she feels like it's something that many are seeking and lots of people have never had the chance to experience. Yeah, absolutely. And Evan says there have been several, mostly failed, attempts through U.S. history to put limits on power in agriculture. Yeah, that's an ongoing struggle. Okay, moving on. Okay, so we're about to get into some text, and before we get into it, I want to add the framing of this culture of question asking. So the Jewish culture tradition is a culture and a tradition of people who ask a lot of questions. And that's something that we cultivate within the Jewish Farmer Network community very intentionally. We say that we are a community of question askers. We are surrounding ourselves with people who are asking the same questions. We're not super answer oriented. And so as we get into each of the texts that we're about to look at, my framing for them, and please feel free, and I'm gonna prompt y'all to come off mute to type into the chat this question of how might we, and you'll fill in the blank, and it'll make sense. It'll make sense to you in a second. So we're gonna get into it. Okay, great. Can I please get someone to read this? Not the Hebrew. Only if you want to read the Hebrew, you can. A voice we haven't heard.
When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not pick your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger.
Amazing. Okay, what are we hearing here? Anything? It's Mary's favorite verse. Anyone like something that's coming up in response to this? What does it remind you of? What does it make you wonder?
I have a question. Where is this in the Torah, I guess? Is this like a section called agriculture? Is this woven throughout?
It is woven throughout. So the Torah, as like the 5 books of Moses, has a lot woven throughout. And then the Mishnah is the commentary on the Torah, and the Gemara is a commentary on the Mishnah. And those two, the Gemara and the Mishnah, the commentaries, roughly, I think it's a third of the writings in the Mishnah, I think maybe more, is devoted to agriculture. How do we do it? How do we do it well? How do we do it in a way that values, right? That takes care of everyone in need, that takes care of the soil. Like, what is the right way to be in relationship with our land in order to take care of self, soil, and community? Awesome. Okay. I see, reminds me of the book Braiding Sweetgrass and learning from indigenous practices of only taking enough of what you need and never more than that. Yes. Sarah says this seems like the exact opposite of our current commercial agricultural system. Yes. Amazing. Okay, so what's happening here? There are actually 3 separate agricultural principles happening in here. So there's the first part is, the first part is that you're not supposed to reap all the way to the edges of your field. So this is the Jewish law of payah. I'll post that in the chat. Payah, which means the corners, which means that when you are setting up your field, you need to designate the corner of your field for those in need. The Torah lays out the stranger, the widow, and the orphan, but it's really for anyone who is in need. And there's a verse that's said in morning in Shacharit, morning prayer liturgy, that says, "Elu hadvarim she'en lachem shiur." These are the things for which there is no limit, and it lists a bunch of things that there's no limit for. And one of the things that it lists is payah. So it says, payah, it has to be the corners of your field, but if you want your whole field to be designated for those in need, go for it. There's no upper limit. Okay, so there's payah. And then there's leket, which is gleaning, right? You shouldn't gather the gleanings. You should leave it open. And shichecha, which is gathering the fallen fruit. So basically, if you harvest like a basket of apples and it's like the best apples you've ever gotten from your farm and you forget them in your vineyard, too bad. I'm sorry, in your vineyard, in your orchard, too bad, not yours anymore. It belongs to those in need. So all of these principles are set forth to take care of those in need, to bake it in already, right? You're setting up your farm. These should already baked in. So here we go. How might we, thank you, Jennifer, for getting ahead. How might we further the interpretation of who is in need, who is benefiting from the edges and the gleanings? It could extend also to the non-human. I love that. I love that. Anyone else, a how might we, or another frame of question that's coming up from this? You can in the chat or come off mute.
I think for me, it brings up a reason why I'm getting connected into growing more is for my family, but and also to share more produce with my neighbors. But I think that it's important to build in that practice as a means, and it just feels better. You know, I mean, it can really be a sense of community, and I think that's what's lost in a lot of, you know, common kind of normal lifestyles at this point. So I like how you listed it as a groundwork, as a framework that guides you through to do what feels natural anyhow. So
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else?
I guess I was thinking, like, how might we develop a broader system where people feel they can do this? Because I feel like many people and many farmers feel like so much economic pressure that maybe this idea would feel a little difficult for them because they feel like they're already struggling financially. So like, how might we set up a broader context where people can follow their maybe natural inclination to leave things to help others?
Yeah, I'm wondering I think just building like, how do we create the systems of support that allow people to crop plan for community care, right? How could we make that possible? I think is like a question that's coming up for me, hearing from you, Mary. Thank you. Anyone else?
How about we farm for the long term?
Yes. How might we farm for the long term? I love it. Can you say a little bit more about what you're thinking?
So really, we're all depending on healthy ecology. And so that means not being so greedy. And in a way, it's like Microsoft's strategy for making money, because they just take a little bit off of every transaction, which sounds really counterintuitive, but I think you get the point.
Awesome. Okay, I'm seeing Thomas says, how might we pay reverence to the soil by supporting the progeny of the people who took care of the soil before us? I love that. Thank you, Thomas.
I have another comment. I'm working with women gardeners in Uganda, in Western Uganda, and not everybody has a garden. The vegetable gardens really are thriving, and they're a source of food, nutrition, and income. And the culture is, you know, it's really important to have good relationship with neighbors. So the culture is to share the vegetables with neighbors, and those that can will buy, you know, maybe buy the higher value vegetables. But, you know, if you want to have a good relationship, which also means that people won't take vegetables, they'll just know that they can have them. So there's that, I guess, exchange, you might say, exchange culture, knowing it may come back to you sometime, but certainly a big part of any surplus just goes to the neighbors.
That's beautiful. Reciprocity. Yes. Yes. I like that, Laura. Thank you. Okay. Are we ready to move on from this one? Yeah. Okay. Great. So how might we hold on. This one was, how might we crop plan for community care, right? So this is that principle, this value of centering the needs of the most vulnerable. So how do we bake that in? How do we make it not an afterthought, right? That we want to donate food. How do we set pieces aside? Okay. Great. Could I have someone who we haven't heard from maybe read this next quote? Anyone?
Sure. 3 times a year you shall hold a feast, a festival for me. You shall observe the feast of unleavened bread and the feast of the harvest, of the first fruits of your work and what you sow in the field, and the feast of ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in the results of your work from the field, the choice first fruits of your soil you shall bring to the house of the Lord your God.
Okay, amazing. This is one of those times that if God language makes you uncomfortable, just blur it out. So what's happening here? The Jewish calendar is an agricultural calendar. The movements of our year revolves around harvest times. And so there are 3 harvest festivals that anchor the Jewish calendar. There is Pesach, which is Passover, which celebrates. So here's what's happening agriculturally. Passover is kidding time, lambing time, right? Baby's born. It celebrates the beginning of the barley harvest. And then 49 days later, it's a significant number, which we'll talk about a little bit. 49 days later, we have Shavuot, which is the holiday that celebrates weaning. Here's what's happening agriculturally. So the weaning is happening on that festival. We generally eat a lot of dairy because we've weaned the lambs that were born around Passover. We celebrate wheat because it honors the end of the grain harvest. So Passover started the grain harvest with barley. Shavuot ends the the grain harvest with wheat. And so we celebrate with sheaves of wheat and also with loaves of bread. And then it also is celebrating the first fruits. Okay, so that's Passover, Shavuot. And then the third one is Sukkot, which is a holiday in which we sit out in a little hut in our field. And that holiday is it's just like the end of the harvest year. It's the end of the fruit growing season. And I'm talking vegetables when I'm talking fruit also. So those are the three holidays that anchor the Jewish year. Does anyone is anything coming up for anybody? Can I talk about that? Does it remind you of anything?
What was the third one again?
Sukkot.
Oh.
Yeah, Laura said solstice. So a lot of these, 2 out of the 3 take place on a full moon. Can anyone think of why that would be?
Well, if everybody is, these are pilgrimage holidays, right? These are times where we're supposed to head to Jerusalem. And so if there's a full moon, it's going to light the way.
Yes, exactly. Awesome, Ashley. You got it. So yeah, so they needed to be at the full moon time so that we could gather together. So it's kind of like, in the winter when you go to your favorite farm conference and you see all your friends that are farmers that maybe you haven't seen all season, and you're like, hey, how's your season? How's your herd? How's their family? And it was this time of gathering together, but it's also a time of celebrating the work of our hands. So can we get a how might we from someone that's inspired by this? How might we? And this is like in your farm, in your agricultural practice. How might we? All right, I'll
This
tell
is
you.
just in my
Oh,
own home, and just on a smaller level, because it's a little micro farm at my own home. But I think just using the moonlight without lights, and I'm in a suburban area, so there can be lights around. But just getting out of our space, it seems like a nice way to just use the natural, when on full moons, just use the natural light to celebrate time outside with your family, not necessarily working, but just enjoying the fruits of your labor. That's great.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Mary says, how might we appreciate more often the work that farmers do in a way that raises awareness of people who aren't necessarily connected to agriculture? Yeah, awesome. So I know that for me as a working farmer, it's hard to take a break. Yes, Mary, how might farmers appreciate their own labor and their own achievements, right? It's hard to take a break, to take a step back, and to appreciate the work of our hands and the work of this season. And so what we're left with here is a question of how might we make intentional time to celebrate the fruits of our labor, to celebrate our labor and those that work with and for us, right? How can we take time to step away from the work, right? To get off the dance floor and into the balcony and just look out and see how amazing it is, how hard we work and how much we have accomplished. I know for me, as a working farmer, having these 3 holidays to celebrate the fruits of the season is huge. It totally shifts my orientation to the work and allows me to ground in a practice of gratitude that I get to do the work, that the work is rewarding, that the people I work with are lovely. And so, yeah, the question is, how might we make time to celebrate the fruits of our labor?
There is an event in California. They're actually not having it anymore because it was too impactful on the farm because it was so popular, but it's an event that Full Belly Farm, one of the first organic farmers in Cape Valley, had for, gosh, probably 20 years.
In progress.
Oops, and it's called,
all right, everyone.
Hang on a minute.
Welcome to the Davis Chamber of Commerce.
And it's called, and then I'll get off, sorry. It's called Hose Down, HOES Down, and it's a big celebration for the farmers and the community to come and celebrate them.
City website for future viewing. The chamber will make this session available.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I try to, even like outside of like Jewish holidays and practice, I love to like invite all my farmer friends over for like a pre-season and a post-season hang. I think it's important. And sometimes we get lost in the sauce, we get lost in the work, and we forget to celebrate how hard we work. All right. Any last thoughts here? Okay.
Well, one thing I hear a lot of farmers elsewhere in the country say is that they really like to take the winter months to really step back and step away from the field and cuddle down in their snow-covered cabins as they wait out the growing season that starts in May. And yeah, California farmers, they maybe get like a 1-month break before it's back to planting. So I think it's really important for California farmers, especially, to be more intentional about setting aside that time to really appreciate the season in the little spaces we have.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. I'm an East Coast farmer, so I forget that that's the case. So thank you for bringing that up. Awesome. All right. Okay, this is a short one. Can someone read this one?
I can go.
Yeah.
You shall not muzzle an ox while it is threshing.
Why not? It's hungry. Yeah. So this piece is one piece of a larger ethic in the Jewish agricultural ethic canon of Jewish agricultural ethics called Sar Ba'alei Chaim, which means that you shouldn't cause undue suffering to animals. So this is one of them. You're not allowed to muzzle an ox while it's threshing. So it's working. It needs to munch. It needs to do its natural thing, even while it's threshing. There's another one that says that you're not allowed to tether, like to pull an ox with a donkey, right? Why can't you tether an ox and a donkey together? Because one of them's going to get hurt because they have different strength, different power. There's also this piece that says you are not allowed to eat before you feed your livestock in the morning. You have to put the care of your animals above the care of yourself. What is that bringing up for anyone? Any reflections on those? Anything coming up? Any livestock farmers here?
You work more symbiotically. You know, they're not just there to serve you. It's more of a give and take.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even when you're tired, because I've been out early in the morning. It's like, I'm tired, but yeah, they're not just there to serve you. It's just changing your mindset.
Yeah. Anyone else? This one's a little straightforward. All right. How might we? Oh, I love this. L-E-L. That's so different from larger meat industry culture today. Yeah, absolutely. And Thomas shared memories of growing up, taking care of those who depend on you. Respectfulness for other beings. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so how might we build an agricultural system that respects other beings, that takes care of those that depend on us? Something like that. What did I say? How do we create an agricultural system in which we treat our livestock with respect? Great. There's a California Jewish farmer. Awesome. All right. Last thoughts on this? Yeah.
Kind of reminds me also that like in a food system where human workers are like put in a condition where they have to treat animals poorly to like make their quotas and like just deal with the demands that are placed on them, like can be really harmful to humans as well. So like this kind of practice sets up a system where the humans can feel good about how they're interacting with other beings instead of feeling like maybe it's undermining their own personal values.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
It's like the golden rule and like treating your animals the way you'd like to be treated if you were a critter.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Okay. All right. Can I get someone to read this? All right, I'll get into it. Oops. Okay. 6 days you shall do your work, but on the seventh day you shall cease from labor, in order that your ox and your ass may rest, and that your bondman and the stranger may be refreshed. What's happening here? Anyone?
I mean, it's just also kind of reminds me of being respectful, like respectful of the needs of other people and treating them as like full human beings who have a life outside of what they're doing for you at any given time.
Yeah, but also care for yourself. Evan said hashtag self-care, right? This is Sabbath. So I do a lot of teaching about the Sabbath, Shabbat, as yes, everybody and everything needs a Shabbat. I do a lot of teaching about Shabbat as farmer medicine. Okay, Shabbat, which is every seventh day we take a break, was set out to help farmers take a break, because we know that it's hard to take a break from our work, but we need sacred cycles of work and rest in order to regenerate ourselves. That's what's happening here. And not just us, but the people who work for us and the animals that work for us, right? You still have to take care of your animals on Shabbat, but you can't be hooking them up to pull your equipment to till your field on Shabbat. They're resting. You're resting. What's coming up for people? What do we think? Muriel, we do not live by bread alone. So Jennifer says, I don't understand the bondman and the stranger part. Is the stranger going out to clean the field? That's a great question. I would assume, and I'm going to say I don't know, and I will say that my best guess is that the stranger may have been invited to work on the farm, right? Or that maybe the farm is like closed to gleaning on the Sabbath, and that they're able to glean extra before the Sabbath, which is like a pattern that is common in the Torah. That's my best guess, but I'm always down to say that I'm not sure. Anyone else? Does anyone here have a Sabbath or like intentional rest practice? I'm seeing no's, head shakes. Yes? Yes. Ashley or Dee, would you mind one of you coming off mute and sharing a little bit? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Sure. I'm actually a Seventh-day Adventist. And so we are Sabbath keepers from Friday night sunset to Saturday sunset is our one complete 24-hour day cycle. And we keep Sabbath.
Beautiful. I love that. And how does that feel for you?
Every Friday, well, when you're a kid, it's a little difficult. You had to turn off TV or, refrain from the regular Monday through Friday lifestyle. But as an adult, in college, it really kicked in. And as an adult now with children, it's like, oh my goodness, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for Sabbath. I look forward to Fridays. It's just that time of rest, Saturday, that time of rest. And it's rejuvenating. It's rejuvenating. I look forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I see someone shared that sometimes on Friday nights they host a tech Shabbat luck at my house, invite friends over for dinner and they turn off their phones. I love that. Evan uses Sabbath mode on his phone every Sunday, blocking work email and social media. That's wonderful. So it's an invitation The Shabbat is an invitation into a different way of walking through the world, one day a week. And just like our soil needs rest, right? So too do we. And I think that, yeah, a lot of farmers I know don't know how to take a break. And this is a really beautiful blueprint for how to do it in a boundaried and compassionate manner. Yes, Muriel said, my first semester in grad school, the only time I could not make myself work was Friday night. Yeah. Ashley said that she used to have a practice where she didn't spend money on Shabbat, and that leads to a lot of other resting choices. Yeah, there's so many ways to integrate this. And as a farmer, it can be so essential. Okay. Great. Sacred cycles of work and rest for us, our crews, and our livestock. And how might we approach Sabbath as farmer medicine or radical farmer care? Any other how might we's? Okay, great. So we're getting into it. We're going a little deeper. I'm gonna just read it. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
But then, so if you actually have to take care of the animals on the Sabbath, then you have to look at it as not work.
Yeah, so the way that I think about it is that there's a differentiation between farm work and farm care, right? And taking care of your animals falls under the category of farm care. So like my personal boundaries around Shabbat is that I will take care of the animals. I'll water seedlings and turn on irrigation because those things all need to be taken care of, right? I'll open the high tunnel sidewalls, but I'm not going to harvest. I'm not going to weed. I'm not going to prune. I'm not going to sell produce. I don't want to engage in commerce. I'm not going to do like, I'm not going to trim hooves on my goats because that can wait till after. It's not, yes, thank you. It's not production focused. So there's like, it's a farm care, farm work differentiation. And that's my personal, like orientation towards it. But that's fairly common. Like, I mean, and it's actually required in the Torah. You have to take care of your animals. They have to be fed. They rely on you. In virtue of them being livestock, they are reliant upon you. And that's the responsibility of the farmer. All right. I'm just going to read these because I think we're running out of time. Do not oppress a stranger, for you know the heart of a stranger as you were strangers in the land of Egypt. In 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in the abundance of it. But the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat. And what they leave, the beasts of the field shall eat. Similarly, you shall deal with your vineyard and with your olive grove. So every 7 days, we take a rest. Our employees take a rest. And then every 7 years, our land takes a rest. Does anyone know what this is called? Maybe you're a professor in college, did this. A sabbatical. The Hebrew word is Shemitah. Yes, thank you, Ashley. So in the Shemitah year, which last year on the Hebrew calendar, so we're in year 5783 right now, 5782 was a Shemitah year. Your land is supposed to lie fallow. You're supposed to take an extended break, you as a farmer. The fences come down and all land becomes hefker, which means ownerless, meaning that it becomes a commons. So every 7 years, everything is kind of evened out. You can glean on your land, you can harvest from what's around, but you can't cultivate your soil and plant things into it anew. And there's this book called Soil, the Erosion of Civilization by David R. Montgomery that talks about the ways that ancient agriculture was actually eroding soil at a fairly rapid rate. But he names a couple of cultures that were doing agriculture in such a way that they could have stayed on their land in perpetuity. And one of those was the ancient Israelite culture because of the practice of Shemitah, because every 7 years we let the land rest.
So,
yeah.
but that means that you have to plan what everybody's going to eat during that year. Does the
Absolutely.
Torah talk about that?
Yeah, so there's commentary on it. And yeah, so I think exactly what you said, you have to plan for it. And if you're someone that has a regular Shabbat practice, a very boundaried Shabbat practice, you know that you also need to plan for that for every 7 days, right? That you're not going to, work, you're not going to use your phone, you're not going to do this, you're not going to do that. And the same is true of the Shemitah year, that that you need to prepare for the 6 years leading up to it. You need to prepare. You need to invest in perennial agriculture, right? And you need to make sure that your grain storehouses are full to care for not just you, but for everyone. And yes, also, Sarah, that's where communities come in. But if we're all resting our land, it's a question mark. I'm just posting the name of that book, and it's called Dirt: The Erosion of Civilization. Okay. Yeah, we got to plan. This takes planning. This kind of boundaried rest takes planning. Any other ideas of how we could make this possible? Or any other things that are coming up when you think about this? Can you stagger which fields are fallowed? That's a great question, Evan. Yeah, so in the Jewish calendar, there is a set year that is the Shemitah year, and it's for all of the land. But it actually only pertains in Israel, Palestine. So in the ancestral lands of the Jewish people, the laws don't actually apply outside of Israel. And so we're left with this question as, for my community, as modern Jewish farmers, we sit with the question of how might we incorporate a Shemitah agriculture into our farming practice. And so this is something we've talked about a lot about, rotating which fields are fallowed. So maybe you have 7 big plots on your land, and every year you let a different plot rest. There's lots of amazing ways that you can interpret and integrate this into your land. Any other ideas? I have some farmer friends who really did a full Shemitah year where they let their land rest. It was really cool. Yeah, a year for more hunting and foraging, an incentive to keep the wilderness intact. Awesome, Evan. Yeah, I love that. Anyone else?
I wonder if that year of rest might also be a chance to more closely observe the health of the land and see what parts of your field are doing better or less well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. I'm so glad that you brought that up, Mary. Yeah. You're not going to notice if you're just constantly inputting and constantly working the land. There are things that are going to show up that you didn't notice before. And the same is true for Shabbat. There are things that come up when you are in a restful state that don't come up when you're in action. Anyone else before I move on? Okay. Great. So how might we incorporate visionary cyclical crop rotation and rest for the land? That's the question that I'm sitting with here. Yes, you can dehydrate and can. Yeah, awesome. I love it. All right. Here we go. So we had every 7 days. Now we have then we had every 7 years. And now we're getting into every 7 cycles of 7 years. Okay. Fruitcake as a preservation method. I love it, Muriel. Does someone want to read this? Oops. All right. It's the last one.
Since
Yeah,
I
go.
brought up,
Yeah.
you shall hallow the 50th year. You shall proclaim release throughout the land for all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you shall return to his holding, and each of you shall return to his family. And what I always took this to mean was redistribution back again.
Yeah. I love that. Something I left out in the Shemitah conversation is that it's also an economic reset, which is that debts are forgiven. And going in even further in the Jubilee, which is Yovel, that's the Hebrew word, which I'm going to use. In the Yovel year, not only are debts forgiven, but all lands are returned to their ancestral holdings. What does that remind you of? Anyone?
Was that communal property then, back then?
I don't think so. I think it's just like kind of like land got like reshuffled over 49 years of like this person had a bad year, so sold some off to that person, and then it just got reset every 50 years. Yes, Mary, land back movements today, land rematriation. These are, yeah, definitely, Ashley, parts that are hard, that we have a harder time figuring out how to implement. So so while we know which year the Shemitah year is still, right? Last year was a Shemitah year. We, in terms of our like cultural amnesia as a people, have forgotten where we're at in the Jubilee cycle. So we don't know when the Jubilee year is. And there is some debate as to whether or not the Yovel Jubilee year was ever actually practiced. So it's like this ideal that we can be reaching towards as like, what would it look like, right? How might we integrate rematriation work into our long-term farm succession plans, right? Yes, radical take, not so radical, beautiful. Reminds me that nothing is really ever ours. Ownership and privatization is yeah. The land is never really ours. We're put here to till and to tend it, right? To care for it, to steward it. The ownership is not necessarily, doesn't have to be a part of it.
I think it's also interesting that it mentions like each of you shall return to their holding. Like it's also a chance to reconnect maybe with your ancestral activities or like your connection to the land. I mean, even back then, I'm sure there were people who didn't have as close a connection to agriculture. Maybe they worked in other trades, and maybe this was a chance to reconnect with that relationship.
Absolutely. Anyone else on this one? So we have expanding circles of sacred cycles of rest. We start here with ourselves, right? And our farm on a weekly basis. Every 7 days, we take a rest. Every 7 days, our animals rest. Every 7 days, our farm crew rests. And every 7 years, our land itself rests. We take a deeper, deeper rest. And then every 7 cycles of 7 years, it's a whole just like smash the reset button on society moment. It's pretty cool.
I had a question about the Shemitah custom. Are there any records of like what people's experience was like during that time? Because I imagine maybe it was kind of a tough time if you didn't plan properly for the previous 6 years. Like, how did people living at that time experience that year in terms of like their nutrition or their like livelihood?
I don't really know. I bet there are. I don't have an answer, but I appreciate the question. And I mean, our ancestors like did a lot of writing things down because we had to kind of carry our culture with us through writing, because ours was a land-based culture that was forcibly detached from the land. And so I imagine that there are records of it in the writings. But then at the same time, the people that like were doing the writings weren't the farmers, right? They were like the scholars. So there is like a lot of the writings about the agricultural work was like theoretical by like scholars and wasn't actually rooted in a lot of ways in the lived experiences of farmers, which is still fairly common today, right? That like disconnect. But yeah, and I think somebody said something about community, because everything is a commons. Like, I think there is this like community care aspect. Like, the only way we can get it together is together, right? The only way we're going to get through this year is together. Yeah. Okay. Plenty of people writing ag policy never set foot on a farm. True. So true. All right, amazing. So there we go. How might we plan for land rematriation? It's a great question. Awesome. So we're gonna, Evan's gonna put y'all in some 5-minute breakout groups, and in groups of 3 to 4. And just take a second you're just gonna take a couple minutes to just like reflect on some of the things that you learned, which of these ideas you might want to integrate into your farm, if any, what was inspiring for you. So Evan, whenever you're ready, that would be awesome. And I think
Sure thing.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Randy. And Evan, you set the timer for 5.
Yeah. A lot of people bailed as soon as you said that. So
That's
I'm,
all right.
I'm reassigning people so that people aren't in rooms by themselves.
Awesome. Thank you for doing that. I know that shuffle.
All right. I think we're at about 5 minutes, I think.
I feel like I need to sneeze, but it's not happening for me.
All right. Should we
You can do it. Bring
bring
them
it
back.
back?
Bring them back.
All right. I got 60 seconds to get out.
Guess I'll share my screen again. Hmm. All right.
Oh, we were having great discussion.
Sorry. Welcome back, everyone. I'd love to hear, a little bit back from like what was shared in the groups.
Well, we grabbed onto the passage about sharing part of your produce, not just with the birds and for composting, but for community. And let's see. And Mary from Sonoma was talking about how there is, in fact, a program for kind of gleaning produce. And she can tell you more about that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I had mentioned a program in Sonoma County called Farm to Pantry, and it's a program that does gleaning. So harvesting crops that maybe aren't like quite up to the aesthetic standard or like that are left over, and then bringing those crops to food banks. So it's a really cool organization, and there's probably similar ones in other places as well.
Yeah, I have a friend that works at a similar organization in Rhode Island. That's awesome. Anyone else? Something that came up in your session? A reflection? There's no right or wrong answer here.
I think for me, there's, oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I just had a quick question. And a lot of, I talked a little bit about how, I'm Mexican American, and our family's been here for multiple generations and actually traveled back and forth between Mexico and what was then Mexico at the time. And there's a lot more connection to native roots, and I'm been really trying to connect to like indigenous farming methods. And so I really liked a lot of what I saw here, because I think, there are some commonalities in ancient cultures. So I think it's really neat that a lot of this history was kind of put out here. But I wonder, how would you feel if, since, we're kind of mixed in this world here in the United States, I'm kind of pulling from lots of different places. Would it be offensive to use some of these things and to kind of say, this is where I learned it from in our own practice? Or, because you pick and choose what kind of works for you. How does?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So cultural, I don't hear it echo, but cultural appropriation is a thing. It's a thing that people do. It's a thing that's like hard to navigate, because like what feels okay for like one Jewish person, right? I'm going to speak about my own peoplehood, like might not feel okay to another person. Another person be like, why are you doing that? You're not Jewish, right? And that's inappropriate. And so I think that, there is this principle in Jewish tradition, l'shem omro, and like in the name of who said it, right? And so in my mind, I think like giving credit and giving, like that, like this is inspired by Jewish agricultural wisdom, I think is fine. And I don't speak for the whole Jewish people, but I do run a network for Jewish farmers. So I'm like, you can tell them I said it was okay. If anyone has.
All good.
And just to like add a little bit to that is that like, and this was like kind of that like outward facing why that we grounded with in the beginning, is that Jewish agriculture tradition is just one of many, many, many ancient ancestral agricultural traditions that can all play an important role, and should play an important role, and should be part of the conversation about how to build/rebuild a more just and regenerative food system that takes care of everyone, right? And again, this is the only way we're going to get it together is like, I think that by sharing this wisdom, all of us, like, maybe we'll figure something out. And so I think it is like, it's so beautiful to hear, people sharing that they're, digging back into their own ancestral roots. And like, I only hope that this can be like an inspiration. So yeah, I hope I answered.
One thing that I thought was, someone mentioned this to me a few months ago, and I thought it was really interesting, was that there are many different traditions, and probably all traditions around the world, if you dig back deep enough, have like a strong connection to the land and a strong connection to like the earth and the seasons and those cycles. And so like seeking your own connection to that through like your culture or something like isn't wrong, because you're seeking your own roots in a way. And I thought that was a really great thing to reflect on.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mary. Anyone else? Reflection? Question? Okay, we got 1 minute on the clock. That's our website, jewishfarmernetwork.org. Keep in touch. If you're going to the North Bay Farmer Gathering on Friday, one of our team members from the Jewish Farmer Network is going to be there. And some other awesome Jewish farmers will be in attendance. So if you're there, say hi. Noah's like a tall blonde man. He likes to wear baseball hats. I hope that's helpful. Probably he'll be wearing a purple sweatshirt that says Modern Farmers, Ancient Wisdom on the back. Very friendly. So keep in touch that way. This is our website. Again, you can follow us on Instagram at Jewish Farmer Network. And if you're a Jewish farmer, we're having a conference in December over Hanukkah. It's going to be really fun. And our last conference was on the East Coast, and this one's going to be in California. So we're coming to your coast. If you're a Jewish farmer or grower, we'd love to be in touch. And that's my email address. I'm gonna try to upload my presentation to the portal if I can figure it out.
Wonderful. And thank you so much to our wonderful host and moderator today in guiding this wonderful conversation. Really appreciate it. It was a really wonderful, interactive, engaging workshop. So I really appreciate that. We hope to see you guys at the next workshop and at our in-person regional gatherings, whichever one is closest to you. So thank you, and we will see you soon.
Thanks, Evan.